a rank holder, first rank holder at the PG level and at MA English and at MS level also, both first rank holder, and Dr. Velayudhan happens to be one of the outstanding resource persons of Government of Kerala in preparing audio material for student fraternity. And today's talk is going to be highly significant, and the topic is highly relevant. We would like to welcome all the participants to this program. It would be a great honor if you share the poster and the link with your students also, so that they can also benefit. This happens to be a flagship program of the Marthapulas Training College Research Wing, Insight, Indepth, and we are about to reach the half century mark, 50th Insight Indepth. We are moving towards that. Warm welcome, everyone, and this is organized by the research wing of Marthapulas Training College, and it is coordinated by the research wing. And I am Dr. Joju, the research coordinator of Marthapulas Training College. Warm welcome, everyone. Over to you, research scholars.
Shall we start, sir?
Please begin.
Okay, sir. Good evening, all. Hearty welcome, dear all, to our 46th talk series, Insight in Depth. Today's talk is on Techno Transformations in New Age Communications by Dr. Velayudhan Nair T. Warm welcome, dear sir. Myself, Tara, and my partakers in the session are Ms. Soumya D.E. with the welcome address, Ms. Pratibha Payas with the intro to the guest, and Ms. Megha Suraj Koshi with the thanksgiving. Let us get relaxed for a bright start. With the prayer, we will move forth into the session. The prayer. Tanla ma'am, please.
സ്നേഹസ്വരൂപനേ കരുണാമയനേ എന്നെന്നും ഞങ്ങളിൽ കൃപ ചൊരിയൂ കോരിരുൾ മാറ്റി നേർവഴി കാട്ടി നിത്യ ചൈതന്യമേ നീ നിറയൂ എന്നെന്നും ഞങ്ങളിൽ നീ നിറയൂ സ്നേഹസ്വരൂപനേ കരുണാമയനേ എന്തെന്നും ഞങ്ങളിൽ കൃപ ചൊരിയൂ മനസ്സിനുണർവേകി നിത്യവും നാദാ മക്കളാം ഞങ്ങളിൽ കൃപ ചൊരിയൂ മനസ്സിനുണർവേകി നിത്യവും നാദാ മക്കളാം ഞങ്ങളിൽ കൃപ ചൊരിയൂ അറിവിൻ നാദവും നാളവുമായി അജ്ഞരാം ഞങ്ങളിൽ നീ നിറയൂ എന്നെന്നും ഞങ്ങളിൽ നീ നിറയൂ സ്നേഹസ്വരൂപനേ കരുണാമയനേ എന്നെന്നും ഞങ്ങളിൽ കൃപ ചൊരിയൂ എന്നെന്നും ഞങ്ങളിൽ നീ നിറയൂ.
Thank you, Sanla ma'am. A genial warm welcome is all that we need to get into. I'd like to have Ms. Soumya D.E. on the line for the welcome address. Soumya ma'am, please.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Audible, Sarah?
Yes.
Yes. Good evening to one and all gathered here. Hope all of you are safe at home, exploring and experiencing the digital platform for the purpose of acquiring knowledge and to get connected with each other. Our prestigious institution, Marthapulas Training College, is also offering an open platform Insight In-Depth Talk series for different scholars, academicians, and prospective teachers to share their ideas. Today, we are here with the 46th Insight In-Depth Talk series, and I find myself delighted to welcome you all to this program. First, I would like to welcome our most respected principal, Dr. K.Y. Bennett sir, who is the backbone of this program. With due respect to his vision, I extend a delightful welcome to our principal, Dr. K.Y. Bennett sir. We all know that technology affects communication by making it easier, quicker, and more efficient. As we make technological advances, new trends in communication emerge and often becomes the norm. Today, our resource person, Dr. Velayudhan Nair, sir, Assistant Professor, Peat Memorial Training College, Mavedikara. He is here with us to enrich the environment and feed our brain with meaningful thoughts on the topic Techno transformations in new age communication pattern. I use this opportunity to welcome Velayudhan sir, an outstanding scholar having a starring personality to this Insight In-Depth program. Welcome you, sir, to this session.
Thank you.
Now, thank you, sir. Now it's time to welcome our research coordinator, Dr. Joju Jones, sir, a person always ready to motivate and support the people around us. Welcome you, sir, to this function. Again, thank you, sir. Again, I take this opportunity to welcome all the distinguished participants, including department heads, academicians, research guides, scholars, and prospective teachers to this session. On behalf of principal, professors, research guides of Martha Plus Training College, once again, I extend a massive welcome. Welcome all of you. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you, Soumya. Today's talk, as said, is on techno transformations by Velayudhan sir, a veteran personality, presently celebrating the chair of assistant professor at Peat Memorial Training College, Mavelikara. To more about sir as an educationist, I would like to request Pratibha ma'am to give an intro to our today's resource person, Dr. Velayudhan Nair T. Pratibha ma'am, please.
Thank you, Tara. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, honorable dignitaries and dear participants. It's my honor to introduce the guest speaker of today's Insight In-Depth series of Invited Talk. We have with us a noted educationist and eminent scholar, Dr. Velayudhan Nair, Assistant Professor, Peat Memorial Training College, Mavelikara. He has a total of 17 years of teaching experience with a PhD degree in education. He is also first rank holder in MA English and MA degree in University of Kerala. I would also like to reveal few of his remarkable achievements in his career. He has published several papers in reputed journals and also authored 2 books, namely Perspectives in Education and Teaching of English. He has participated and presented papers in more than 30 conferences at national and international level. Currently, he is serving as a chief editor of biannual journal in education and also the member of editorial board of council for Teacher Education Foundation. It's my privilege to have him as a chief guest and speaker for today's talk, Techno Transformation in New Age of Communication. Welcome you, sir. Thank you. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you, ma'am. Before we get into, let us have a homemaking process. We all are aware of it, but for the sake of reminding, please mute your audio and video for the uninterrupted conduction of the session. Do follow the instructions of the resource person. Do post your queries in the chat box, will be surely addressed. We value your comments and queries. Always take the high road. It's far less crowded. Let us all take the high road and make the transformations. So without much ado, let's turn the time over to our Velayudhan sir. The platform is yours, dear sir. Sir,
Excuse
sir,
me,
your
sir. Thank
audio is
you.
muted,
Thank you.
sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Once again, it's mute, sir.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Tara teacher, Saumya and Pratibha for the wonderful introduction. It's a rainy evening here in Trivandrum, so good evening, Matthew Phillips Training College. It feels so wonderful to be back here again, and thank you so much for having invited me over a second time to the Insight In-Depth series. It's a privilege and a great honor to be here, especially since being asked to speak on a platform that is offered by Matthew Phillips Training College is always like going back home for me. I see Benedict sir here, I see GP teacher here, all these are people whom we have looked up to probably 20 years back, when we were sitting there on the French benches of the general classroom of Matthew Phillips Training College. It brings back so many fond memories that I'm kind of overwhelmed. Thank you so much for having me again. When Jojo asked if I could speak to you a few words on any one topic of my choice a few days back, I immediately said yes, because there's no saying no when it's Jojo asking. I immediately said yes, but then I started wondering what I should be speaking to you about. I thought probably I could speak to you on communication, or probably I could speak to you a few words on technology, or probably a combination of both of these. And after much deliberation, I thought probably I should talk to you on the one skill that teachers have been so much concerned about ever since the profession of teaching was discovered, so to say, centuries back. That is communication. And the communication process, as we know, has been transformed all across the world due to the influx of technology, especially over the last few years. So, which is why I decided I would take a look at what the communication process is all about. These are things that you already know, I'm sure. But then we would also take a look at how technology has transformed the whole communication process. And we might also take a quick look at some of the communication skills that we might need as teachers in the new age, the 21st century as such. So I'll just start my presentation now, and then I would really like it if one of you could confirm if my presentation is visible or not.
Sure, sir.
It's visible, Dr. Velayudhan. Perfect.
Thank you so much. Techno transformations in new age communication patterns. So I thought I'd present a beginner thought before you first. And this is a very famous quotation by George Bernard Shaw, in which he says that the single biggest problem in any communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Now, I've colored up that one particular word, illusion, which means a wrong or a misinterpreted perception of something. So this is probably the one biggest problem that we've always had when it comes to communication, that there's always an illusion that the communication has taken place, wherein actually the communication has not taken place at all. We'll take a look into this in detail in the coming slides. But let me begin with something that's quite familiar to you. In fact, these are all things that you are absolutely familiar with, that you know like the back of your palms, which we have learned and which we have probably taught for the last several years. But we need to brush up these small little things before we move on to something that's more important. So I thought I would start with a definition of communication as such, which has been derived from the Latin word communicare, meaning to share. And it's a process of understanding and sharing meaning. I want to draw your attention to three words here: The first one is process, which means that it's a dynamic activity. It's constantly changing. Communication itself is a process that's constantly changing. And the second key word is understanding. This is a very tricky thing. Now, if a friend comes over and tells you that he has fallen off a motorbike, what do you understand? What is the image that actually comes to your mind? Is it the same thing that that you see when the friend actually points out of the window and you see a motorcycle lying on the ground out there? Is it the same image that you had in mind? So is it the same kind of understanding that you had? That's the second thing. And the third one is something called sharing. And in any communication, sharing occurs when you sort of convey your thoughts or your feelings or your ideas or probably your insights to other people.
Excuse me, sir. Can I interrupt?
Yeah, please.
Sir, the slides are not moving.
Oh, it's not moving.
Velu, it is better to convert into the presentation mode and then use the keyboard arrow.
Let me just check, please.
It's not in the presentation form, sir.
I'm actually sort of presenting here. Let me
Maybe
see
some
if
network issue, sir.
maybe. Let me take a look.
Just present once again, Velu, Dr. Velayudhan, it will be fine.
Is it visible now?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Visible. Okay. Just let me know if the slides are moving back and forth. Just
Move
give me
to the full screen mode, please.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
correct.
All right. And is it moving? Is it moving back and forth?
Yes. Moving.
Thank you so
Very
much.
good.
Okay, so we were talking about this small definition that I have presented before you, and we have talked about the three words: process, understanding, and sharing. And finally, we have something called meaning, which is the trickiest part of communication, because I was talking to you about, a friend coming over and telling you that he has fallen off a bike. Now, the question that I want to ask you is, when you hear the word bike, what is the image that comes to your mind? Because the English word bike actually stands for a bicycle. It might stand for a motorbike as well. So meaning is a very tricky thing, So by looking at the context in which the word is used and by asking questions probably to the one who is conveying the message to you, we can understand the actual meaning that the person is trying to convey. So these are the three focal words that we need to concentrate on. It's a process. It's all about understanding. It's about sharing. And finally, meaning is probably the most important thing. Now, what you see on screen is a very common graphic that you might already have come across on the internet at some point of time. And it's just a very neat representation of the most popular forms of communication that exist today. Now, what makes this image very special is that, it ranges from, it's arranged on, on a matrix of intimacy. It ranges from 10 as the most intimate to 1 as the least intimate. For instance, like if you take a look at this picture, you see that the most intimate form of communication still remains talking. Even in the digital age, this is the most intimate form of communication. And then going down the ladder, at a slightly lesser intimate level, you have something called a video chat. At a slightly lesser intimate level further, you have something called a phone. Down further, you have a letter. And then down further even, you have something called an IM or an instant message. Further down the line, you have a text message. Further down the line, you have an email or Facebook message, Facebook status. And the least intimate mode of communication that is existent today is a Twitter message. So you see that communication in the most intimate range involves actual visual or auditory interaction, whereas the least intimate one lacks both of these. Now, these are the three essential requirements for any sort of communication to actually take place. You need to have a sender. The sender is also called a source. And then you have to have a medium wherein the message is transmitted across. And then you need to have a receiver. So the sender is the person who actually creates a message. The sender is the person who sends the message across. In a public speaking situation like this, for instance, I'm the person who's speaking to you right now. So I'm the sender. So I convey the message by sharing some sort of new information with the audience, And the medium or the channel is the way in which the message travels across between the sender and the receiver. I'll give you an example. You could think of the television, for instance. Now, the television we know is something that combines an audio signal with a visual signal, and it presents a kind of a message before you. Now, turn off the volume of the television. Can you still understand what's going on there? Many times you see that you can, because the body language that you see on the television conveys some sort of a message, of the show that's going on. Now, you could just turn up the volume and then you could turn around, so that your back is to the television and you can still hear the dialogue, and you could follow the storyline. So this is a medium. And similarly, when you're speaking or when you're writing, you're using a channel to convey your message. For instance, like this could be a spoken channel, for instance. A spoken channel could include face-to-face conversations, or it could include a speech, for instance, or a telephone conversation, and so on. But when it comes to a written channel, this might be a letter maybe, or a newspaper or a magazine article. A blog could be a written medium, or an email, a text message, a tweet, and all these things. So this is what the medium is all about. And then finally, at the other end of the spectrum, you have somebody called a receiver, the person who actually receives the message from the source. And this is the person who actually analyzes and interprets the message. But when you're interpreting the message, this could be done in ways that are both intended or probably even unintended by the source. This is something that often happens in communication, right? So as a receiver, you listen to something, you see something, you touch something, you smell something, you taste something, and then you receive the message. So these are the three essential requirements that you need for any sort of communication to take place. And these are the four primary steps. Again, these are all terms that we are familiar with. So first of all, you have these huge thoughts that is springing up all over your brain. And once these thoughts are like struggling around in your brain, then what you do is, as a sender, you encode all these thoughts into some sort of communication, and then it might be a it might be a written message, or it might be a spoken message, or whatever. And the encoder then uses the medium to send this message. Now, the medium might be a phone call, or an email, or a text message, or whatever. And then what does the audience do? The audience decodes it, interprets it, and interprets these messages for themselves. And decoding is, in fact, the process of turning this communication back into thoughts. Again, this could be best explained with the help of an example. You're feeling hungry, you're feeling really hungry, and there's all these sort of vampirant hunger thoughts, storming around in your brain. And then what do? You encode your thoughts into a text message, and you send it across to your wife. Okay, would you like to have some dinner tonight? And then she receives it at the other end, it transmits across to the medium of a WhatsApp message or an Insta message or whatever. She receives it at the other end, after the transmission is complete. She decodes it, thoughts, converts it into her own thoughts, and she might send you back a message. So this is what the basic communication process is all about. It's not confusing at all, and these are things that, again, as I said, we're all familiar with. There can be two forms of communication. One is verbal communication, when you're actually making use of language for communicating something. You make use of languages here, you make use of speech sounds here. Now, this could either be vocal or non-vocal, that is oral or written. I mean, it could either be like making use of speech sounds and actually speaking to someone, or you might not make use of speech sounds at all. Instead, you might be making use of the letters of the alphabet, and then you might be writing to someone. So these are all, kinds of communication that might fall under this broad spectrum of verbal communication. And then you might also have something called nonverbal communication, NVC as we call it, in which there's a lot of transmission of messages happening through non-verbal platforms. Now, non-verbal platforms might be like eye contact, it could be facial expressions, gestures, or postures, and so on and so forth. Let's quickly take a look at some very common forms of non-verbal communication and then move on to something else. So I start with gestures here, and then we know that a gesture always makes your message stronger. Like an example of a non-verbal communication gesture is when you point out at something that you would actually want your listener to take a closer look at. You're pointing out at something, or then you are, you have this, you deserve that your colleague or your co-worker deserves some special recognition. So you're sort of motioning very warmly towards him or her. That's again a gesture. And making a fist to show your frustration or to show your anger, that's a gesture again. So these are all like very common gestures that we keep on making every day. And then we need to be familiar with the term called kinesics, in which like we are talking about communication that combines body movements with gestures and facial expressions. So it's not gestures and facial expressions alone. You're combining your whole body here to convey a message. You know, non-verbal behavior using any part of the body, and it could also include communicating using your body as a whole. See, on screen, you see lots of very common kinesic postures, wherein you see the third one, for instance, you know, when you see a person who is just standing slightly slouched with his arms in front of him, which conveys a very universal message that the person might be apologetic and sorry, you know. And if the person, on the other hand, has crossed his arms behind his back, you know, it might probably suggest guilt. You know, the first one, in fact, is like popular. We have all done that at some point of time in our lives or the other. When you're slouching slightly forward, and when you have your arms resting on your knees, which is again a universal kinesic that suggests exhaustion. You're extremely tired. So these are all like very common non-verbal communication patterns. And then what about posture? Posture is again like the word. It just simply very simply refers to the way in which a person sits or stands or walks and so on. You know, two very common forms of posture have been identified. One is open and the other one is closed. And we know that you know, if someone is sitting with his arms or, you know, legs crossed or positioned at a slight angle, you know, from the person who is sitting across, then this might be assumed to be a closed posture. Now, if someone, on the other hand, is sitting directly across you and, you know, you're facing the person, and the person is sitting there with his hands apart or probably on the arms of a chair, that might refer to an open posture. Now, what is the difference between an open posture and a closed posture? Now, closed posture is usually it's usually expected to imply discomfort or disinterest in something, or probably diffidence, whereas an open posture is always used to communicate openness or probably interest in someone, a readiness to listen, you know, and so on. So again, posture. And then what about facial expressions? Oh, the human face, as we all know, is probably the most expressive thing in the whole world, and it's able to convey countless emotions without even saying a word. And unlike some other forms of nonverbal communication, you know, facial expressions continue to be universal across the world, which means that facial expressions for happiness or sadness or anger or surprise or maybe, you know, fear, all these very commonish emotions, they remain the same across all cultures. They remain the same across all countries, and they remain the same across all continents. So it's just the same. These are the facial expressions that you would find across the world. And then what about oculesics? Again, like it refers to the study of oculesics. The science refers to the study of eye contact and pupil dilation, as you call it, you know, in terms of nonverbal communication. Again, like as in the case of posture that we discussed slightly earlier, establishing direct eye contact means that you're establishing interest. You are establishing openness when you're, you know, establishing direct eye contact with someone. On the other hand, you know, aggressive eye contact or flitting eye contact, when you're not establishing proper eye contact with someone and when you're looking somewhere else, you know, this could be interpreted as a sign of hostility or disinterest. So again, oculesics. And what about proxemics? Proxemics is again like the study of personal space. In Western culture and society, for instance, they say that there are 4 kinds of distances have been identified, and these are very commonly observed in Western culture. The first one is something called intimate distance. You know, the intimate distance is a kind of distance it's a kind of distance that you observe when you're interacting with or communicating with someone who is very close, like for instance, a very close friend, a family friend or someone. There's very little distance between the two people. When you're standing extremely close to the person, when you're actually probably even touching the other person, even that close, that could be considered as intimate distance. On the second level, you have something called personal distance, when you have slightly moved away. Like for instance, this is supposed to be most appropriate for people who are holding a conversation, and you know, at this distance it's very easy to see the other person's expressions and eye movements. It's very easy to sort of gauge the overall body language. Handshaking can occur, but you know, it's not as intimate as the first category. It's slightly farther away. And in the third category, we have something called social distance, and it's a normal distance that's very commonly maintained at at workplaces, in staff rooms, in, all common work environments, with which have people working together in the same room, or even, during social gatherings and all, you maintain a social distance between one another. And then you have something called, the final category is called public distance, wherein, like right now, the kind of distance that exists between you and me is something called public distance. Teachers, for instance, or public speakers, for instance, address groups at a public distance. Now, what is very special about public distance is that, the non-verbal communication, like gestures, facial expressions, all these might actually be lost on the audience, because the person who is speaking to you is far, far away, and you are like likely to be, very further away from the person who is speaking to you. The speaker needs to keep this in mind, because he needs to understand that all the subtle facial expressions that he's using to sort of communicate a message might be lost on the audience, So clear hand gestures could be used as a substitute. Larger, head movements could be used, and so on. So these are all, things that are very commonly used by experienced public speakers, who is aware of the changes in way, the body language could be perceived and could be understood and interpreted at longer distances. So proxemics. And then we also need to talk about haptics. Now, haptics is the study of touching as nonverbal communication. You do understand that touches can be defined as, can be considered as handshakes, for instance, or holding hands. When you see a long lost friend, you hug him, for instance, or you kiss him on the cheek, or these days you have people backslapping you, or, the high five that is considered to be the in thing these days. You also have these shoulder pads and, arms brushing against each other, fists, rubbing against each other, and lots of haptic patterns are also there. So these are all like very common non-verbal communication patterns that we are already familiar with. We also need to take a look at intrapersonal and interpersonal communication. And intrapersonal communication is when you start communicating with yourself, when you could be talking to yourself, you could probably be imagining scenarios. You could even be visualizing things. I'll give you an example. You read on the phone that your friends are going to have a get-together somewhere in a favorite restaurant of yours. So what are the things that come to your mind when you read that message? This is intrapersonal communication. What are the sights that come to your mind? What are the sounds that you hear? What are the scents that sort of, stream right into your nostrils? What is the last thing? What is probably an event that happened, the last time you were at that restaurant? Do you plan to join these people, or would you like to send your friends a text message asking if they want company, asking if you should join them, and so on? So like lots and lots of things that are happening in your mind, wherein you could actually be talking to yourself, or wherein you could be just imagining things, and visualizing things. That's all about intrapersonal communication. But when it comes to again, like on the screen, you see that it's all about internal discourse, and two kinds of intrapersonal communication might be very distinctly, identified. One is solo vocal communication, the kind that I have been talking to you about right now. And you might also indulge in solo written communication. Solo written communication is when you start penning down your thoughts, when you start maintaining a diary, for instance, when you start posting something on Facebook, for instance. All these could be examples of solo written communication. And then you have something called interpersonal communication that we as teachers need to be probably a little bit more concerned about. And we have three major categories. The first one is dyadic. Again, communication between two people is commonly referred to as dyadic. And it's a simple conversation between two friends, maybe, or two individuals. It could be an exchange of letters or emails between two people. Again, that could be a dyadic communication. But when more than two members are involved, probably a small group of members are involved, we call it group communication. And in public communication, messages from a single person will reach or will be received by a much larger number of people. It's going to be a much larger audience. So this is what it's all about. And then the communication cycle, in fact, sums up all that we have been talking about till now. We'll just take a quick look at what has been happening. So I said, like, we begin with a few random thoughts that spring up in your mind, and the sender encodes these thoughts into a form of a message. It could either be written or spoken, and then he sends this message across through a medium. The person at the other end, the receiver, in fact, receives a message, decodes the message, and he might, in fact, provide feedback, and depending on the feedback, there could be further encoding and decoding happening. So it's a very simple cycle that is absolutely not complicated, and which we are, again, very familiar with. Now, we'll also take a quick look at what the barriers to effective communication are. And I start by discussing physical barriers. Now, physical barriers are like simple barriers that are experienced on a day-to-day basis by most of us. This could be geographical distance, or it could even be outdated technology. Now, geographical distance is when people are located at different corners of the globe, for instance, or probably in different corners of a room, for instance, or in different rooms, or in different sites, and so on and so forth. When you're actually separated by a geographical distance, when it becomes difficult for you to communicate across to someone, unless and until you are using some other means of communication. So that is geographical distance. And when it comes to outdated technology, again, like communication could be real bad. See, like right now at the beginning of this presentation, I did have a few setbacks, right? Setting up the presentation, and then setting up the audio and setting up the presentation, and then counter checking if my voice is audible, and counter checking if my video, like the presentation, is visible, and so on and so forth. So these are things like you need to constantly update yourself with, because if you're left with outdated technology, it means that you might be left out in the communication process as such. And then what about systems design? So especially in schools or colleges, or when you're dealing with students and so on, an organizational structure is very important, because students need to clearly understand what the organizational structure is about, who is there, who's occupying the topmost position of the organization, and who's like further down, and which is the position that I occupy in this organizational structure. Because an organizational structure that is unclear, it might make it confusing to know who we are trying to communicate it with. So that needs to be a very clear one. The second thing is, when it comes to a lack of clarity in the roles and responsibilities that are sort of, placed on people, that needs to be very clear as well, because otherwise this can lead to people being uncertain about what is actually expected of them. So again, when it comes to system design, you need to be very clear about organizational structure. You need to be very clear about roles and responsibilities if communication is to take place properly. And what about attitudinal barriers? These are things like we very commonly come across these days, because personal attitudes, in fact, play a huge role when it comes to effective communication. Now, we often see that, differences in attitude could pose a huge barrier. This may be like due to lots of reasons. One, it might be lack of motivation, or probably, a person might be dissatisfied at what he is doing. So this could create a negative attitude towards something, or probably he has received insufficient training in something. So again, a negative attitude has resulted. Or probably some people are just resistant to change. We do come across people like that as well. When you tell them that, this is likely to change probably, or probably this is a new way of doing things, immediately there is resistance. So again, like these are all attitudinal barriers that you very commonly come across in the communication process. What about ambiguity? Now, ambiguity is like, ambiguity, the word itself means lack of clarity. So you see on the screen, you come across signboards like this in real life as well, where like there are three arrows, pointing out to three different directions, but the terminologies that are given at the bottom of the signboard are just the same. So it's absolutely confusing. It's absolutely ambiguous. It's not clear at all. You need to be very, very clear as to what you want, if the communication is to be very, very effective. And what about individual linguistic ability? We do understand that people vary widely when it comes to individual linguistic abilities. There are people among us who are able to communicate excellently well, whereas there are lots of people who are probably not able to communicate that well, probably in the written medium, or maybe in the spoken medium. There are, like, we know that even for people who are able to communicate excellently well, if you're using very difficult words, or if you're using very inappropriate words in a communication, this could prevent people from understanding the message. Or poor explanations, maybe misunderstanding messages. All this could lead lots and lots of communication. So ultimately, a person's individual linguistic ability, in fact, contributes a lot to communication. What about cultural differences? Now, differences that exist across cultures, across countries, for instance, across states in a cultural country like ours, for instance, there's always an example that I think of, very interesting when it comes to usage of certain English words by people who reside in Kerala, for instance. For an average Malayali, we know that the word porridge, for instance, means kanji. അപ്പോൾ കഞ്ഞി എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു വാക്ക് നമ്മളെല്ലാവരും വളരെ കോമൺ ആയിട്ട് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വാക്കാണ്. നമ്മൾ പണ്ട് ചെറിയ കാലം മുതലേ നമ്മൾ കുടിച്ച് വളർന്ന ഒരു സംഭവമാണത്. അപ്പം നമ്മൾ പോറിഡ്ജ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോഴേക്കും ദ ഫസ്റ്റ് ഇമ്മീഡിയറ്റ് മലയാളം equivalent that springs to your mind is always kanji. But we know that porridge is absolutely different from our very delicious kanji. And the word, as a native British speaker has conceptualized it, is very different from the kanji that we have in mind. The porridge essentially is a breakfast, a cereal dish, for instance, wherein lots of cereals are thrown in, wherein lots of fruits are thrown in, wherein lots of milk is poured in, and so on. It's a kind of a thicker version of kanji, probably a thicker version of broth even, that is so far different from the routine kanji that we have in mind. That is, for instance, an example of a cultural difference. And then what about psychological barriers? There are lots of factors that affect communication, psychological factors in particular, because as human beings, we are very happy and we are very receptive to information when the sun shines. When the sun shines, meaning like when we are having a very positive day, we are all receptive to information. But if it's, on the other hand, a cloudy day, for instance, a rainy day, probably we might sort of shut ourselves down. And if I have a personal problem, for instance, if I have a worry about my health, my family, or something else, this is going to affect my perceptions. This is going to definitely affect the way in which I'm trying to communicate, or the way in which I'm going to receive communication from the other end. So these are psychological barriers. And what about noise in communication? Now, noise is nothing but disruptions that occur when a communication process takes place. And this might be like, there might be different reasons. Environmental noise is just physical noise that physically disrupts communication. Like, for instance, if I'm talking to you and there's a loudspeaker blaring on at the background, at a party, or the sound from a construction site that is right next to my room, that could be environmental noise. But and there's also something called physiological impairment noise, wherein the person at the other end, the receiver, or probably even the sender, is physiologically impaired. The person might be deaf, or he might be blind, or this could all impede effective communication, and it could interfere with the kind of messages that are being clearly and accurately received, right? And then what about semantic noise? Semantic noise is, semantics is the science of meaning, for instance, and semantic noise refers to a particular situation when the speaker and the listener have different interpretations of certain words. Kanji is an example. For example, if you take the word weed, for instance, WEED, weed in the conversation, this is a word that could be very commonly misinterpreted. There are lots of weeds growing around in my backyard. And this is again a message that could be misinterpreted. Weed very normally refers to an undesirable plant that is growing in your yard. സാധാരണ നമ്മുടെ ഒരു അർത്ഥത്തിൽ അത്, പക്ഷേ വീട് എന്ന് പറയുന്നതിന് ഇപ്പോൾ പ്രത്യേകിച്ചും ഈ കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ വളരെ സ്പെസിഫിക് ആയിട്ട് വേറൊരു അർത്ഥവും കൂടെ, വിച്ച് മീൻസ് ഇറ്റ് ഓൾസോ സ്റ്റാൻഡ്സ് ഫോർ മാരിജുവാന. നമ്മുടെ കഞ്ചാവ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കാനബിസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന സംഭവത്തിന് നമ്മൾ വീട് എന്ന് പറയാറുണ്ട്. സോ പുറംപോക്കിൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ വീടിന്റെ പുറകെ വീട് വളരുന്നുണ്ടെന്ന് നമ്മൾ വളരെ കാഷ്വൽ ആയിട്ട് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ചിലപ്പോൾ പോലീസുകാരായിരിക്കും വരാൻ സാധ്യത. സോ സെമാന്റിക് നോയ്സ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ലോട്ട്സ് ഓഫ് causes of lots of impairment in communication and it stands a lot of chance wherein messages could be misinterpreted across the medium. Environmental noise, physiological impairment noise, and semantic noise. Now, what about syntactical noise? Quite similar to semantic noise, but disruptions in communication that are caused by grammar. Syntactical noise, such as making abrupt changes in verbs or tenses during a sentence and so on. And that's a syntactical noise. Cultural noise is again something that we have already referred to. And then finally, we have something called internal noise. Now, internal noise is all about the physical distractions that you might have, you might experience, that exist within you. For instance, like if you're having a recurring illness, for instance, that is constantly distracting you from everything. This could in fact lead to impairment in communication, disruptions in communication, or if you're suffering from jet lag, for instance, if you have just landed down on the earth after having a flight, you might be sort of dizzy, and you might experience sort of disruptions in communication, or you might have some certain phobias, for instance, or you might be going through a midlife crisis, and these might all be different reasons that might contribute to internal noise. So that is it. That is it. In fact, these are all things that I just wanted to brush upon. And now we are moving on to what I believe is probably a noteworthy part of the presentation today. And communication modes in the 21st century. These are all concerned, all these said, it goes without saying that communication modes have phenomenally been transformed and transferred by the influx of technology over the last decade, probably over the last 10 years or 20 years, the last couple of decades. And this is what I would like to focus on today, how communication modes have been transformed by the influx of technology during the last 10 years, maybe. How has technology been transforming communication patterns? See, there are so many concerned about the influence of technology on language in particular. And we know that language, in fact, forms probably the most important component of any communication process. Of course, there's nonverbal communication, but most communication processes bank heavily on language to convey messages across. And technology has been influencing language in ways that have been incomprehensible and unimaginable. In fact, it is said that individuals will no longer know how to speak and write, the standard English, as you call it, due to the emergence of something called internet slang. Consequently, this could also lead to an increase in grammatical errors, because people these days, when you're texting it, especially, people these days are absolutely not concerned about making errors in grammar or so on. It's like they make do with whatever language is, available at their disposal. So let's take a quick look at how technology has been transforming communication patterns. Now, what you see on screen is something that is very, very interesting. Everyone uses abbreviations these days. This is a new world of abbreviations, as I call it. Now, the question that we need to, pose before ourselves here is, why were abbreviations created in the first place? I believe at least a few of you might remember, around 20 years back, probably in the late 90s, we saw the introduction of the text messages for the first time. We used to have these cute soapbox Nokia mobile phones those days, which we used to sort of send text messages across. And back then, we had a limited number of 160 characters, that were permitted in a message. So this would mean that if you were typing extra characters, you would have to pay a small extra fee for every text message that was sent. And this was the reason why abbreviations were discovered in the first place. At that time, abbreviations were so much essential to save your money, save your time, and of course, space as well. These days, text message length has increased considerably. There's no limit on typing out text messages, but abbreviations are still popular. In fact, they are more popular than ever before, because people like to communicate faster these days. So let's take a look at three particular scenarios that you see on screen right now. The first one is a conversation between a mother and a son. In fact, the mother says, "Your great aunt just passed away. LOL." And LOL, so she's just conveying a message to her son. And the son is, in fact, very surprised. So he's asking, "Why is that funny?" So the mother replies, "It's not funny, David. What do you mean?" And then the son further explains, "Mom, LOL means laughing out loud." And the mother is shocked. And she says, "Oh my goodness, I sent that to everyone. I thought it meant lots of love. So I have to call everyone back. Oh God." So this is the first scenario. The second scenario is even funnier, if you ask me. And this is a message between, again, a mother and probably a son or a daughter. What does IDKLY and TTYL mean? This is a question that the mother asks the person at the other end. And the daughter, the son, replies, "I don't know, love you, talk to you later." So we understand that the person is actually explaining the abbreviations to her, but the poor mother doesn't really understand. And she says, "Okay, I'll ask your sister," because she believes that the person actually doesn't know. She doesn't understand that the explanations of the abbreviations are being given here. That is scenario 2. And the third one is actually, these are the kind of messages that you receive from your students these days on WhatsApp. Sometimes, these students these days are like highly proficient in sending messages using abbreviations, and sometimes it absolutely sort of confounds you as to what this person is actually meaning. Great seeing you. That's the third scenario. And see the reply, LOL, was great to see you too, but oh my God, got to go, talk to you later. Now, this in fact takes a lot of practice, in fact, to understand what these abbreviations are all about. But again, this is a world that we are currently living in, and it's like constantly increasing these days. And especially the newer generation is absolutely proficient in using these abbreviations, that it's almost like a second language to them. So it doesn't take much, for them to understand or type out these letters. So it's only for people like us, probably us meaning like, people belonging to a slightly older generation, that find it very difficult to sort of decipher what these people are actually meaning by all these abbreviations. So that is the first thing that I would want you to take a look at. And what about emojis? The language itself is changing, because sometimes, haven't we all experienced scenarios in which you type out a long text to someone on WhatsApp and then you suddenly receive an emoji in return? There's absolutely no text that is being sent across to you, sent back to you. You just simply receive an emoji because it conveys a lot of emotions. Now, I want to talk to you about Dr. Scott Fahlman, who actually in 1982 discovered the first cute emoticon, which was a simple smiley face. And these are basically punctuation marks and numbers and letters that are used to express emotions. But these days, emojis have multiplied. Any number of emojis that are available these days, and these are pictographs of faces or buildings or foods, animals, birds and whatnot. And just like abbreviations, emoticons are being used to save time, money, and space in text messages. But again, like using emojis could be a very tricky thing. Haven't you all experienced at least one situation when you have actually sent across the wrong emoji to somebody across, and then you have immediately deleted it? Because that was not the emoji that you actually want to send them across. Okay, and this is by the slip of a finger, this is the emoji that has been sent across. So immediately delete it. And these emojis are currently being used to add lots of meaning and clarification to your messages. But again, technology transforming communication again. And what about the new world of extended meanings? See, I wanted to take a look at a few words that you see on the screen right now. And you need to understand how the language itself has been transformed, or sort of mutilated, I would say, by the influx of technology in a very positive sense. I wouldn't say all this in a negative sense. I would probably say, that these are all changes that we need to accept and move on. That's the only thing that we could probably do. But then again, let's take a look at these words. Block is a very common word that we have always understood as a front of something, or probably, a group of buildings, or probably a road or a path, and so on and so forth, something that, or probably it could just mean something, a hindrance that is placed right in front of you that you simply cannot pass through. That was the original meaning. But now, block means to prevent someone from contacting you on a social network, like Twitter, for instance, or from viewing your profile, or blocking on WhatsApp and whatnot. So block, the word itself has changed. That's the first word. Now, what about the word handle? Handle was always a part of something that is designed to be held by your hand, like a door handle, for instance. But today, the handle is, it has sort of assumed a totally different meaning. It refers to your screen name, for instance, or the name that you go by on the internet. What's your Twitter handle? People ask you, or what's your Insta handle, or what's your Facebook handle, and so on and so forth. So that's a particular kind of name that you have adopted for yourself on the internet. What about ping? Ping was just a sharp sound. It's like a striking bullet, for instance, made a ping sound. That was what a ping was all about. But today, ping is all about making contact with someone by sending a brief electronic message, like he pinged me on WhatsApp, or she pinged me on Instagram, or she pinged me on ShareChat, and so on. It's a text message that is sent across. So that is, again, another word. What about tablet? A tablet was something that you used to take when you're sick. But these days, a tablet is a general purpose computer that a small version of a computer that contains a touch screen panel, right? And what about unplugging? Unplugging was just pulling off the plug, disconnecting something, a lamp or a television from an electrical source. But today, unplugging is, is all about making a decision not to use digital or electronic devices for a period of time. I am unplugging off Facebook, which means I'm not going to use Facebook for a considerable amount of time. So these are all, common words that we have been using ever since English was probably discovered. And now we see that these words are being used in absolutely, a new context. So much so that for people like us, probably it might lead to sort of small confusions. And what about the new word of nouns that have changed the words? See, again, like when it comes to, this is the best example that I could probably present before you. Due to the popularity of the Google search engine, the noun Google, the name Google, has been developed into a verb these days. So to Google, which means, and this is a word that is officially recognized by the Oxford English Dictionary. So to Google is in fact, it means to search the internet with any search engine, not necessarily Google alone. You could search with Bing or any other search engine of your choice, but you could still call it to Google. So the noun friend also has become a verb these days. Friend has always been a noun. We have been taught that friend is a noun, but to friend someone is adding someone on your social network, to friend someone. I friended him. I friended him on Facebook. I friended him on Twitter and so on and so forth. So these are again like nouns have been changed to words, again by the influx of technology, by the influence of technology. And what about the new world of emerging words itself? Now, I should say that technology has contributed a large amount of words. In fact, a significant amount of vocabulary to the language as such. These are words that never existed, but these are words that have come into being over the last probably couple of decades. The first one is an example called digitize. Digitize is the process of making something digital. Like for instance, digitizing books into an ebook was an excellent idea. So that's again, it's used as a verb, a very common verb. Now, what about fakazation? Have you heard of the word called fakazation? You might have heard of conversation. Conversation is a very common familiar word that we have all come across, but fakazation is a conversation that is faked for the sake of removing yourself from an unpleasant or very awkward situation. Like I used a fakazation to leave early from the party. I was at the party and I used a fakazation to leave early. So that is again like that. The word itself is derived from fake profiles on Facebook, meaning something false. And then what about uncloud? Uncloud is it's all about managing or organizing your cloud storage. How do you manage and how do you organize your cloud storage? I give you an example. I'd probably say my place is such a mess. I should uncloud it, and then I should see what I actually need. This could be an example. I should uncloud it, meaning that I should start organizing it. I should properly organize it into so that's how like new words themselves have been. And again, like there's one more, flaming. And flaming, what is flaming all about? Flaming is like, it's quite similar to trolling, for instance. Flaming is like when you see very offensive and insulting comments that are posted online and so on. This could be intentional or unintentional, but you go to these celebrity profiles on Facebook or Twitter and all, and you see lots of comments, mostly very offensive comments that are posted. So this is what you call flaming. So what have we been dealing with? We have been dealing with lots of technology, and we have been sort of dabbling with different kinds of communication modes. And we know that cell phones and mobile devices do allow users to stay connected even when they're far, far away from their computers. This could be a great benefit, especially in emergencies. But the problem is, this is also an omnipresent distraction. This is something that we have been dealing with in classrooms, for instance, because hundreds of thousands of people are known to suffer injuries every year in accidents, probably, distracted driving and texting and cell phoning when you're behind the wheel and so on. So that is one example. But technology can also be a major distraction inside the classroom, inside the home, inside the office. As always present, these instant message applications are always around you, and social networks are constantly drawing your attention away from more important matters. So again, that is very important. And what we have been dealing with is dehumanization, wherein you have to sort of constantly deal with technology and human qualities are being sort of pulled away from you in different directions, when you need to sort of step back and take a look at what kind of an impact technology has in fact have been having on your psyche. We have also been dealing with social isolation. Social isolation meaning like, privacy issues. One major thing that we have been talking about is privacy issues. Like communications that you send across over the internet, for instance, maybe insecure, and this might actually allow third parties to, read email conversations, interpret internet messages, and so on. So if so, this is one thing that has been happening, and isolation is also something that we need to be talking about, because internet is something that allows lots of anonymity. Unfortunately, this could also lead to users behaving in ways that are completely different from the way in which they would if they're having a face-to-face conversation. So like over a period of time, you see that lots and lots of people are sort of drawing back into isolated shells, and sort of living secluded lives and so on and so forth. And we have also been dealing with shorter attention spans. Sorry. Thanks to the social media and thanks to the communication patterns that we have been having due to the influx of technology, we also have extremely short attention span these days. We are bombarded with short videos. We see that we have been like receiving lots and lots of videos and pictures and all these things on WhatsApp, for instance. And how many of these videos do you actually go through? You start a video and then you stop at the third second and you move on to something else, right? So we are bombarded with all these kinds of messages, and it only adds to the problem. We tend to lose our focus quickly. We surf from one video to another post. We tend to sort of shift from one news article to the next and so on. Dealing with shorter attention spans, and then limited social skills and interpersonal communication as well. Again, like a very negative, very common side effect of technology, which suggests that, social networking keeps us entrenched in impersonal contact, because you're not interacting with persons on a face-to-face level. And oftentimes we don't get as much face-to-face contact as we once did probably 10 years back. As a result, our social skills are not as highly developed, when compared to those who spent more time out in the world face to face with people. And their abilities to pick up on social cues and body language also have been found to be dwindling. They have been going down, which leads to more miscommunication. And interpersonal communication is, again, the current generation in particular has been alleged, it's an allegation rather, but we do say that the current generation lacks essential interpersonal skills, especially the ability to express ideas and thoughts to one another face to face. And the major reason for this tendency is, of course, increased frequency of communication through texting and chatting on websites. There are options, plenty of options otherwise, that are readily available on their fingertips. So why should they actually bother to actually interact with someone face to face? That's a question that most of these people ask you these days. We have also been dealing with less empathy and more stress. Again, like self-explanatory. A new generation that has become lesser empathetic, of course, stressed out like never before. And what about minimal nonverbal communication? Yeah, because technological means have also affected nonverbal communication. We have the newer generation, in fact, in particular, lack of face-to-face interaction has reduced the nonverbal grasping power of individuals. So you don't, the newer generations, are not so much adept in using gestures and facial expressions and all these things. Many of these people today are alleged again to have deadpan expressions on their faces. Deadpan expressions on their faces meaning like it's very difficult to actually look at a young person these days and understand what the person is actually going through. It's very difficult to actually understand what the person might be trying to communicate, because they have these deadpan expressions on their faces. So nonverbal communication is also very much limited. And I would also take a look at some of the contemporary teacher issues that we have been dealing with when it comes to communication. The first question that I want to ask you is, are they truly listening anymore? Are they, meaning like the students who are sitting in front of you? And when we're communicating with someone, we often are not committing our full attention. When somebody is talking to you, you are probably not listening to them fully. So we might be looking at our phones, we might be watching television, or even daydreaming about something else. Okay, a little bit of attention is right there with the person who is speaking, but a majority of it is actually lost on us. So when we don't actively listen to the person who we are speaking to, not only do we run the risk of making the other person feel invalidated, but we also miss very important nonverbal cues. We may not fully understand the person's message. And to avoid these communication mishaps, it is best to give the speaker 100% of our attention. So effective listening skills, in fact, this could include making eye contact, asking clarifying questions, basically remaining engaged. That is what it's all about. So the first question is, are they truly listening anymore? And if they are not truly listening, what are the things that we could do to make them listen to us? Question one. Question two, are they assuming more than they know? Now, this is not just applicable to students. We have all done it at some point. We are listening to a friend speaking, and we already assume that we know what the person is going to say to us before they finish their sentence. And when we assume we know that what the person is going to say, we miss what is actually being said. So this is again leads lots of miscommunication. So the sentence is probably broken right in the middle, and then you utter the response already. So honor the speaker by remaining very openly curious and listening intently for the message rather than, predicting what is going to be said and uttering a response before the sentence itself is complete. That's the second thing. Now, the third thing is, are they interrupting you more than they should? Again, this is something that we have all done probably at some point of time. We have probably all interrupted another person mid-sentence once or twice at least. It can happen very accidentally, or we may get so excited about what we want to say, and we might fear that we'll forget our response if we don't go just right ahead and say it. So you might interrupt the person who is speaking to you, and you might start saying something, and others may interrupt during arguments. Is a power move, because you want to sort of counter the person who is speaking to you. So what you do is you raise your voice and you interrupt the person mid-sentence, and then you speak to him. You believe that you have won the argument. That is also something that you do. So whatever the intention may be, interrupting can make a person feel invalidated again, as if what they have to say is totally unimportant. So have respect with the other person and allow them to finish the message entirely before you actually respond to them. Are you using more you statements than I statements? This is again a tricky one, because when we are discussing our feelings with another person, we need to own those feelings, rather than place the responsibility on the other person. I'll give you an example. It's very, very easy to say you did this, or it's very easy to say you didn't do that, but when we start making use of I statements instead, we take ownership of how we feel, and we are less likely to sort of put the blame on the other person, and we are less likely to make the other person feel attacked. So instead of saying, you didn't call me back, you could try saying, I felt hurt when you didn't return my call. So it's all about my feelings rather than what you did, So you could always use you statements and I statements. Are you letting your emotions dictate your response? Again, another very interesting question. When we react very emotionally, we are likely to say things that we don't really mean. A good communicator always allows the emotions to sort of sit for a while, to sort of settle down, and then chooses to carefully respond, rather than react. So are you just uttering whatever comes to your mind when an emotion sort of, flows into your head? Are you just letting your emotions take control of you and uttering whatever comes to your mouth? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves. And are you misinterpreting the message? Again, very, very important when it comes to communication, because we may actually misinterpret others more often than we think. Because to avoid this, it is best to give the person our full attention and paraphrase the message back to the speaker, to ensure that we have understood the things correctly. I'll give you an example. Suppose you're walking along the college corridor in the morning, and a person comes, a student, probably in some other optional class, comes rushing across you, and then she or he brushes across you without a morning greeting, and she rushes to the general hall where she's, she joins the class there. And immediately a few emotions and thoughts spring to your mind. Why was she disrespectful to me to this morning? I mean, what is the kind of values that these generation of students have? And these are all random thoughts that spring to your mind. where in fact you have gone into a blaming mode, where in fact you are trying to put the entire blame on that person who failed to sort of pay the respect that you had expected her to. But in fact, what had actually happened was that she had missed the bus, and she was in fact trying to rush to the general hall, trying to evade the gaze of the principal, who is standing probably behind some, pillar or something, keeping a watchful eye on students who are coming in late. So she was trying to evade the principal, and the process of, rushing towards the general hall, she probably didn't even realize that you were standing there right in the middle of the way, and you didn't exist for her because she was absolutely taken up with something else. But you have actually misinterpreted the whole message, and you have attributed things like disrespect or lack of values or lack of morals and all these things on her, which actually don't exist at all. So you might be probably misinterpreting the message. And in today's society in particular, we are more susceptible to misinterpretation because we rely heavily on technological communication. Without the tone of a voice, without nonverbal cues, it can be very easy to misunderstand each other. Now, have you heard of the example of, sending an email? Like a person was asked to send an email to an employer, and the person actually was not much, probably, not much conversant with the language. One, two, he was also not very adept in using technological devices. So the caps lock button was on, and the person typed the entire message in capitals and send across the email to the employer, to the prospective employer, and he was immediately rejected from the post. And this was because an email that is typed in caps is assumed to be shouting at someone. When you type a statement in caps, especially when you're typing a text message or when you're typing an email message, when you're typing out something in caps, it is assumed that the other person is shouting at you. Now, either it could be in aggression or probably, just like that, whatever it be. So anyway, this was considered to be extremely rude, and the person was rejected right hand. So again, like there are lots and lots of chances when your messages could be misinterpreted, especially with the influence, especially when they come under the influence of technology. And what about this question? Are you being indirect? Again, isn't this something that we have all done at some point of time? Because we all try to be very subtle. We all try to be indirect in communication. This is usually very ineffective. We can't expect other people to read our minds. So if you want someone to understand you, try being very direct. Try not to beat around the bush in conversations and say whatever comes to your mind. Again, like leave the message amply clear without any scope for ambiguity at all. And are you attacking character than behavior? Again, a very interesting question. When we're very upset with someone, it is very easy to say things like, you are a jerk, you are an idiot. And these are all statements that come straight out of your mouth. So you're attacking the person's character here. And an effective communicator would address the actual behavioral issue and leave it at that, rather than, making a personal insult or making a personal assault at somebody's character. So probably the behavior is something that needs to be addressed rather than, the character as such. So we need to be very careful when you're framing these sentences, assaulting character rather than behavior. And are you avoiding difficult conversations? So when faced with the possibility of a difficult conversation, many people choose to avoid or at least prolong the conversation as long as possible, because people usually perceive a conversation as difficult, when they're faced with telling something that they know that the other person won't really want to hear. Unpleasant news, for instance, or it might be delivering bad news or bringing up a news of some conflict of interest and so on. So when it's false news or fake news, or probably, even bad news for that matter, news that you believe that the listener would not like to hear, you might have this tendency to avoid conversations. So if you have this tendency to avoid difficult conversations, again, this is something that we need to get over. So in this modern digital age, teachers need to be flexible, and we need to be able to adapt with whatever is thrown our way. We need to have confidence, of course, for the communication to be brilliant. We need to communicate clearly. We need to be able to have the skill to develop as, part of a team or a group, for instance. I'll quickly take a look at these as well before I wind up. Needs to be very confident, very clear, Teamwork, of course, is there. And what about imagination? It definitely contributes to communication as such. And then continuous learning. The teacher needs to be a continuous learner. Sorry again. Imagination, continuous learning, and then leadership. Again, like, just give me 1 minute. Sorry for that. Okay, so they need to be a leader, and they just lead by example, good role models, for instance. And then what about organization? Again, like the ability to organize and prepare for the unknown, the willingness to try new things, innovation. Innovation is the willingness to try and discover new things, for instance. And commitment, again, like one major communication skill that you would need as a 21st century teacher, because you need to be always engaged in the profession. And this is probably the oldest traditional teaching skill, but it's also a modern one: commitment. And maintaining an online reputation is, in fact, it's a funny thing when you look at it as a term. But the 21st century teacher, again, like, modern teaching skills demand new skills on the part of the teachers as well, which means we need to have an online reputation as well, and we need to maintain the online reputation as well. We need to how to manage on an online reputation on social networks, or LinkedIn or professional networks and so on. How are you planning to connect with your colleagues from other social networking profiles? And how do you sort of separate your private lives and public lives, online lives and offline lives, and all these things? The ability to find engaging resources is, again, like very, very important. And understanding technology goes without saying. And knowing to unplug, again, like this is like very, very important, because as modern teachers, we need to know when it's the time to unplug from social media and just relax. Because teacher burnout is a reality, and it's even more critical for them to take the time to slow down and care for themselves. So it's very important that they understand, when it's the time to sort of unplug and slow down. Empowerment, again, like inspiring teachers. How would you be an inspiring teacher? And then patience, of course, one of the most essential qualities or attributes, a communication skill the teacher needs to have is patience. And then time management, of course. And I'm just rushing through these because it's almost time. And finally, online collaboration, rapport building, and understanding diverse perspectives. Yes, that's it. So you don't have to be a rigid teacher anymore, right? Because being rigid in modern times is absolutely absurd. So we need to sort of understand the way in which our students think, step into their shoes for a while, think when you were a student and how you would have reacted in the same situation. This makes the whole situation itself better and manageable. So this is all that I would like to talk to you about. Jay, thanks so much for like very, very patiently listening to me. I know like it's quite late in the day, and it's quite a stormy weather out there. So thanks for turning up despite all this, and for very patiently listening to me. And this is a final thought. I'm a teacher and I can handle anything. This is the one thought that probably we need to keep in mind. The one question that I would leave behind is, can you? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Velayudhan, for the exceptional talk. It was stunning. All of us are enriched and plenty of take home, plenty of ideas. Thank you very much. Now, is there any queries in the chat box?
I think Mr. Samuel from Leo, what's the country's name? Mr. Samuel, are you talking? Please switch on your mic, please. Mr. Samuel, switch on your mic and speak.
Yes, sir. Clear. Talk, sir. Please. You are audible, sir. Talk now. Please interact. So
Yes,
you're
sir, you're
audible,
audible.
sir.
Yes.
Carry on. Sir, why don't you talk loudly, please? Louder, please, sir. Your voice is very feeble, sir. Please carry on.
Now it is improved. Increase the volume, please. Hello. Maybe you are speaking from far distant place.
Sir, you can put down in the chat box.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes,
If I can ask now.
It's okay. It's okay now. It's okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Dr.
Mr.
Velu,
Samuel,
first of
you are
all,
audible. Audible, Samuel.
yeah, Dr. Velu, first of all, very nice talk. The slides, the way your diction, all call for appreciation, really. In fact, I was enjoying the talk so much that I was also appreciating the organizers to invite you for the talk. Really, very nice.
Thank you so much.
The question which I wanted to ask is exactly not a question. I just thought if you could add on paralanguage under nonverbal communication, because that's a very powerful aspect of nonverbal. And could you also elucidate on the meta communication part of communication? Thank you.
Thank you, Pratima, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Pleasure is mine, Dr. John. Thank
Now,
you so much. And Sanila, thanks for
thank you.
inviting me, like
Dear
informing
research
us.
scholar, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear research scholar, why don't you check the chat box, please?
Dr. Velu, if you can take some water, I think that will be better. I think there's a throat, you have some issues there. I really wish. You please have some water, warm water.
No, that's okay. No problem.
Okay. So could you please say something on meta communication? Meta communication.
I couldn't really properly. Were you talking about? Oh, I'm sorry. Just let me.
Yeah, I was asking that if you can add something on meta communication aspect of communication.
Oh, you were talking about paralanguage.
Yeah, I said, yeah, we could add also on paralanguage, yeah. Because
Okay,
that would make MVC
now,
complete.
paralanguage is nothing but it's also called vocalics, and it's like it's a component of meta communication, in fact, and it's like modifying meaning. It's like adding on to meaning by conveying emotions and so on. And it's all about using linguistic devices like prosody, and you have these speech devices like pitch and volume and so on. So based on all this, you can sort of raised intonation, lowered intonation, raised volume, lowered volume, and so on and so forth. So basically, it's conveying meaning again, like using all these different kinds of speech devices in the language.
Right. Thank you so much. And meta communication?
Yeah. It's in fact paralanguage is in fact a non-lexical component, and it's just one small component of meta communication as such. And this is again like used to sort of modify meaning. Am I audible again?
Yeah, very much audible. Absolutely.
All right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
Velu.
Yes, Mary Florence ma'am has raised her hands. She want to ask
Dr.
something,
Ben.
sir. Velu, sir.
Hi, sir.
Hello.
Hi, sir. I'm Mary Lauren from Bangalore, sir.
Hello, ma'am. Yeah.
Your presentation, very excellent, sir. Very nice. You've done your presentation.
Thank you.
Hi, Mary Lawrence, ma'am. Please talk.
Yeah, I'm talking, sir. Very excellent presentation, sir. I learned a lot from your presentation. And being a teacher, you have done justice to your profession also. So very elaborate, very clean, and we understood everything. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Nimi Uman. Please, she has raised her hand. Please, ma'am.
Good evening, Jyoti sir, Bendik sir, Velu sir, good evening. I hope I am audible.
Good evening, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Because
Yes, yes.
we are download here. That's why I'm asking. First of all, let me congratulate Dr. Velayudhan. As usual, it was an evergreen and versatile presentation. And you spoke about certain tips while we are typing the emails and all. Like if you have a sentence in caps fully, when you reach the other person, receiver, it gives the message that either you are shouting or you're like aggressive. Okay. So my question is, could you please add on some other tips also? Because emails and all, every day we are dealing with it. So this kind of information, even though it seems to be small, it is highly valued. So sir, can you add some tips if you love to share here?
That's
Others can also add in the chat
yeah,
box.
please do, because
Now, this part of the program, others can also brainstorm and add some tips in the chat box.
please do, because that's the only one tip that comes to my mind right now, because that's a
Yeah,
very commonly used tip all the time, no? Typing in
But
caps
Dr.
lock versus
Velu,
shouting. Sorry?
Dr. Velu, I owe you a special thanks for that because I always type in capital letters, and that's a new piece of information to me also. Thank you, Dr. Velu, for that.
I believe like
I also make the same mistake every
Dr.
time. That's
Nimi,
why I was so surprised, when you spoke about it. And even worried
Dr.
because of the
Nimi,
messages that we sent earlier without knowing all these things.
Dr. Nimbi, I can give you one more suggestion. If
Yes,
you
please.
are typing some formal letters, never use short forms that youngsters use. That's important. And if you are talking to senior persons, never resort to shortcuts because youngsters use fewer words. And if you are talking to senior persons, always type the full spelling. That's one tip from me. Okay, thank you.
And that's okay. That's a good suggestion from your side. Thank you for that piece of information. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nimi ma'am. Samuel sir? Yes, you're
Yes,
audible, sir.
yes, you are audible.
Okay, I am very much happy and delighted to be part of this group. I've learned a lot all about communication, and I hope that this session will continue. And I consider myself to be family of and be part of this group. I hope that what I've learned I'll put to good practice, and special blessing from Sierra Leone. As I said earlier, I'm a social worker. I was able to join this session through the help of the influence. A big thanks to her. And once more, I appreciate the teacher which facilitated this program. And I hope and continue this program will continue at all time. Once more, thank you very much for your kind attention.
Dr. Velu, I think that Samuel was communicating something regarding the usage of punctuations and other things, the format of shouting, etc. that you have mentioned something.
Okay, sir. Like I absolutely couldn't hear what he was saying. So like the volume was too low, in fact. So,
Samuel sir, can you please type that in the chat box, your query, please, sir? It's not audible clearly.
Dr. Velu is a great singer as well. Velu, we are not prompting you to sing today because you have got a bad throat. Thank you. And his songs are available in YouTube. You can listen to stunning songs by Dr. Velayudhan, and he is a great singer also. Benedict sir,
Yes,
a piece of appreciation from you, and we can move on to concluding what.
yes. I think that Mr. Samuel was conveying his appreciation for today's presentation.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So congratulations, Dr. Velayudhan Nair, for your excellent presentation. We feel that you just and the closing part you just skipped a few statements because of the paucity of time. Anyway, we will give one more chance for you to elaborate all that particular areas. And by one particular information that I went through today morning is that the periodic table after Mendeleev has given the classification of elements into the form of periodic table. Last year we celebrated the 150th year, and now the modern periodic table is based on the atomic number. No, but scientists are in a process of converting the periodic table based on a new kind of parameters. They call it as the Mendeleev's number. See, this Mendeleev's number is a combination of, it is supposed that they are working on it. Mendeleev's number is a combination of the atomic radii and the electronegativity of atoms. See, the electronegativity of atoms is the ability of an atom when they are in a chemical bond to attract the shared pair of electron towards the nuclei. And then the atomic volume and electronegativity will decide the factor by which the compound stability of the compound formation and so on. So that new material science could be derived out of this new pattern of periodic table that is being worked out. See, after hearing your presentation, what I am thinking about is that we had the traditional communication theory, all the communication theory, not only in teacher education, but in all other social science and behavioral sciences usage, the neuro-linguistics, many other combined areas are there. But one particular thought that is being popped up in my mind is that even in our classroom pattern, we have the the triangle, that is the what we call it as the usually we use in our educational technology class is the plan interaction analysis. The other one, the triangular shaped concept, that is, I just forgot the name. See, the arrangement of different kinds of equipments in the increasing order of communication, like that. See, there is, after the new wave technology, there must be a new kind of nomenclature and categorization of the communication mechanisms. This seems to be a promising new area for research and investigation after the COVID area, means after these couple of years. That may be the reaction that I want to give to your presentation. I appreciate we have to seriously think about not on a just a webinar mode of presentation, but a little deeper mode of analysis. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Velayudhan sir, there's one more raised hands. Myrtle Victor. Myrtle Victor, please.
Actually, time is up. That particular person can chat in the chat box, please. People are asking for feedback. Move to water thanks, please.
Okay, sir. Thank you. A grateful heart is a stamp of gratified mind. I pray thee, Megha ma'am, to deliver the vote of thanks for the session. Megha ma'am, please.
Thank you, Tara. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, one and all. Respected Principal, Dr. K.Y. Benedict, Distinguished Speaker of the Day, Dr. Velayudhan Nair T, Research Coordinator, Dr. Joju John, teachers, and dear participants. I am extremely privileged to have this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the research wing of Martha Training College. I would like to extend our sincere thanks to our dear principal of the college, Dr. K.Y. Benedict, for organizing the Insight In-Depth series and taking it into greater heights. His unparalleled vision and enthusiasm is a great asset to this college. Thank you, sir, for your unflinching support. I am beyond words to express our gratitude to Dr. Velayudhan Nair for the wonderful deliberation on techno transformations in new age communication patterns. Without a second thought, we can say that the message he has shared with us is outstanding and very relevant. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation and also for sharing your valuable time with us. Dr. Jojo John had been our greatest supporter ever since he took charge as the research coordinator of Matthew Training College. His unceasing motivation and magical words are always beneficial to our academic pursuits. I thank you, sir, on behalf of all research scholars of Matthew Training College. I extend my sincere thanks to all teachers who are from our institution and as well as from other colleges for spending your valuable time with us. No program is a success without the participants. A heartfelt thanks to all the participants for your active involvement and patient listening. We sincerely expect your participation in the coming weeks also. Once again, I thank you all. Have a wonderful week ahead.
Thank you, Megha ma'am. Let's wind up the
For
session
the
with the
attention of the
national anthem.
participants, we organize in 1 second. For the attention of the participants, we organize Insight in
Sanila ma'am, please wait for a
this
moment.
program
Sir is saying something.
every Monday at 6:15, and you can watch all the recordings in YouTube. Thank you. Move towards national anthem. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you,
Thank
Ansi
you all
ma'am.
once again. Thank you, Ansi ma'am.